One of the main reasons people tell me they don't want to leave a position outside of financial security is lack of clarity and confidence around what to do. This feeling can 100% be remedied if you are ready to do the work. There is no quick fix to finding a job or advancing in your career, but being strategic and doing the work will pay off. If you're ready to work, let's go. This is one episode in a 20-episode season designed to provide career foundations for experienced professionals. We are going to give you the tools to find clarity and confidence, help you with your resume, give you simple interview strategies, known job search strategies, negotiation tactics, and more, all with an experienced professional in mind. My name is Julia, and I'm the career strategist behind the Ride the Tide Collective podcast, where we equip ambitious professionals to strategize and take action to advance their career. Hi all, episode 14 of our 20-episode second season is about asking questions in an interview. How do you know what questions to ask? Are there off-limits questions? How many questions are too many questions? Are there different questions to ask if you have more experience? Well, I'm answering all of these in this episode. Before we dive into the questions, we need to do some work to know what questions we personally need to ask. If you've been around the podcast for a while, you've probably heard a few episodes that talk about what you value or what drives you. Having this information first will make creating your question list significantly easier. One simple exercise you can do to start this process is to consider what you find most frustrating in your current position or company. These frustrations are usually tied to a value you hold that is not being honored or met. You can also consider what you like about your position, manager, or company and generate questions that align with what you love. Along with this exercise, check out episode 3 in season 1 to learn more about articulating your values. I'll link to this episode in the show notes. When you are preparing for an interview, you always want to prepare questions for each stage of the interview process if there are multiple stages or interviews. The questions you ask need to be aligned with the person or group interviewing you. If you are interviewing with a recruiter, they will have limited information and a different perspective than an interview with a direct hiring manager. One common complaint that I have heard from recruiters and hiring managers when I worked in higher ed and worked directly with recruiters is that people do not ask enough questions in the interview process. And for them, that can be a red flag for you as a candidate because it shows them that you aren't engaged and you're not fighting for what you need in the position. So this is definitely something that you want to consider as you're going through the interview process. But here are some common interviews that you might encounter in your process. The recruiter interview is usually a very structured interview where all the candidates are asked the same questions. In these interviews, you will want to have questions prepared about the interview process, the organization, and I always like to ask ego questions regardless of who is interviewing. More on ego questions in a moment. The hiring manager interview is going to be the most important because this is where you can find out about their leadership and management style, expectations of the position, dynamics on the team, and address other questions that align with your values or experience. In some cases, you might do an interview with the team you'll be working with, which is a great opportunity to ask more about team dynamics, their own perspectives, and their expectations of the role you are interviewing for. You might also have an opportunity to interview with the CEO, board members, or other high-level C-suite leaders, especially if it's a smaller company or if you're applying to a higher-level position. These interviews are usually less structured, and the questions tend to be more big picture and strategy related. When you prepare questions for your interviewer, you will want to think about the role of this person and the questions they will be able to answer given their position. This could be questions about the goals and future of the company, asking about company strategy, asking about their most important initiative, their expectations of your role, and as always, asking the ego questions. Now that you have an idea of the types of interviews you might encounter, let's get into preparing questions. I mentioned ego questions before, which are questions that you ask someone about their experience. Everyone likes to answer questions about themselves, and it's great for those who might be in an interview on the panel but don't hold any power and rarely get to talk. There are a few questions I think are important to ask of everyone you interview within a company if you have time. The first is, what is your favorite part of working here? Depending on their answer, you will get an idea of what they like about the company, and if it takes them too long to answer the question, that could be a potential red flag. You might also see a pattern if you interview with multiple people, which could be a good thing or possibly a bad thing. What is your favorite project or part of your position? I always like to know what people like about their role, especially if you're in a team, because it gives you insight into who they are and what they value about their work. The third question to consider is, what is one thing you would improve about this organization? This is a fun question because it might throw some people off, which is the point. I use this question to help determine if the situation is toxic. If you ask it in a panel interview, pay attention to eyes and body language. They will tell you a lot about what is going on in an organization. And the fourth question, how long have you been working here? This is a simple question that allows you to determine turnover, especially within a team. If it's a relatively new team, but the manager has been around for a while, I'd want to know what led to that team being so new. If it's a newly formed division or working group, that's fine. But it could be a red flag for that manager if their team is turning over quickly. In some cases, you might only be able to ask one of these questions, and which one you choose will depend on the situation and what you value personally. One tip I always give clients who are interviewing at a new company is to research the company in recent news. Especially if it's a larger company that would be reported on, you want to know what is being said about them in the world. In some cases, you might find there is a scandal or an issue you never knew about, and you can ask about it in your interview. Similarly, you want to check all the social media of the company just in case there are any posts or content that might not align with your own values or that you want to learn more about. Searching a company online can also clue you in to mergers, acquisitions, and deals that might impact your position, and you want to be ready to ask about them. How companies deal with change management is really important if you're being hired in the middle of some type of large acquisition or merger. Some of the best questions are the ones where it is clear that you have done your research and your questions are deeper than the headline. In some cases, their answer or lack of answer will allow you to make an informed decision about whether this is the right company for you. So what I mean by that is you want to read an article and summarize what you read to the person interviewing you, and then ask a question that you know they'll be able to answer about the information that you found. If you are interviewing internally, you will likely be asked questions that someone on the outside can't answer. And it also gives you a chance to ask questions that will show them you are dedicated to the company and know what you're talking about. Internal candidates tend to get a harder line of questioning, so definitely be prepared for that. In an ideal world, you're fairly positive that you will take a role once you get to the interview, but that's not always the case. If you haven't networked your way into the interview, you might be going in blind, not knowing who you're interviewing with, and your questions will help you make the decision. This is why I always push for you to network and have calls with people, because you can ask more questions in advance to help you determine if the company or manager will be a good fit. It keeps everyone from wasting time in the interview process. You can also share in the interview process, if you do end up liking the company, that you've met with certain people to talk about things that they like and ask questions. And that's very acceptable. If you're asked whether you have questions, you can say, no, I've met with multiple people before I even applied, and a lot of my questions were answered during those conversations. And that shows that you took initiative to find out more about the company before you even put yourself into the hiring process. And especially as you advance and are more mid-career, your network should be priming your next role for you. Going out on multiple blind interviews and not knowing what you're getting into is a waste of your time. But I digress. Let's talk about how many questions to prepare. And there really isn't a number, but being over-prepared is best with a few questions that you absolutely want to get answered. What I have seen happen to people is they only prepare a few questions, and if they are doing multiple interviews or rounds, the initial questions they asked get answered early, and they don't have anything for future interviews. This is also why understanding who you are interviewing with and the role they have will help you ask the most appropriate questions. Most people in an interview aren't going to ask inappropriate questions. Usually people are asking enough questions to make an informed decision, so this isn't usually something that I worry about with clients. Having said that, I'd be more concerned about your language when answering questions. Having emotional intelligence and sensitivity around how you describe people and situations is extremely important. When you have more experience, you are likely to have very specific questions based on your values and past work experience. This is why the work I mentioned in the beginning is important. The more experience you have, the less you're going to make exceptions when transitioning positions or companies. So make sure you understand what you value in your life and your career. I also want to note that as you move into leadership positions, your line of questioning should change with the level you seek. In early career, you are typically more focused on your tasks and day-to-day. A management role is going to focus more on people and policies, especially if you go from a place with loose policies to a place with more strict policies. Beyond that, your director, VP, C-suite roles are more about strategy, alliance, and relationship building. At each level, you'll want to develop questions that will help you do your job better if you do get it. Who knew figuring out questions to ask in an interview could be so involved? I'll leave you with this. Most of these questions can and should be answered before the interview takes place because you have been meeting with people in the company. You like what they're doing and you've had a relationship with the hiring manager, so there is little to no surprise in the hiring or interview process. As always, if you have any questions or would like to continue this conversation, please connect with Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.